Welcome back to Beginner Miniatures. Today I'm painting Joker from the Knight Models Batman Miniatures game. I really like this model a lot. It's really slender and has a lot of nice detailing in all of the fabric that really lets you explore with that a lot. I'm beginning this model with his shirt underneath his jacket, just because that's going to be one of the lowest points, so I want to finish the lower stuff first so I don't get more paint on it as I'm working. I'm beginning with a very dark orange. I'm mixing black into a lot of my base coats throughout all of this model, so it will really have that nice shadowy look that you get from Gotham cities at night. After the first orangey base coat goes down across all of his undershirt, I'm just beginning by adding small amounts of orange and yellow to that mix to brighten it up. And I'm covering more centered areas that won't catch as much shadow, as well as all of the raised creases on his shirt. Right here I'm just getting all the little edges on his sleeve, which has a lot of sharp detail. For this model I'm really going to try to push how much contrast I can put on it. At this point in the highlights I've started to mix in more yellow, so it's less of an orange, and this will start to bring it up to more of a yellow shirt color, so it will match nicely with his purple over jacket. I'm making sure I'm catching all of the detail, including the raised seam in the middle of the suit, as well as all of the buttons, as well as his shirt collar going around the top. I wanted to make sure I really caught all of the edges on this and really brought it up to a bright yellow. So here I am working with yellow, and yellows tend to be a very not opaque paint. They tend to be very translucent, so you can go a lot stronger with your color shifts because they won't get full coverage, and then build up multiple layers with the same coat. And again, just upping the color to be an even brighter yellow, just really catching those smaller areas to really bring it up to a nice and bright highlight. At this point I've even mixed white in, so that way it gets a little bit of a stronger color for these final highlights, so it's a little more opaque. And I'm just tracing the center line of his shirt to really bring that detail in, because it wasn't sculpted super clearly, so I wanted to force the eye with some extra paint detail. Now we're moving on to the face. Knight Model sculpts very small and finely detailed faces, which I really like, but they are hard to paint the eyes. So the way I like to do it is I completely fill in the eye with white, even going completely all around it, and then come in with a very small line of black, just straight through the eye, trying to get it to line up and make it look like he's looking straight, and then I'll push it back with a dark skin base coat around it to get it right up to the edge of the eye. Now working onto the skin base coat. For this was white mixed in with a little bit of flesh tone, which you might think would be too light for a base coat, but because it was going over straight black, it actually darkened it down nicely. At this point I felt like his face was a little bit too dead, even for the Joker, so I mixed up a little bit of red and brown wash and went over his entire face with it, just to bring a tiny bit of light into all of the shadows. Now I'm just coming back in with adding white to my base coat and adding it to all of the highlight areas, all of the areas on his forehead, his eyebrows, his nose, his cheeks, and just bringing up the brightness on those areas as well as the opacity. I wanted to make sure I was mixing in some skin tones and stuff into the mixes just a little bit, because I wanted it to look like his skin was actually white and it was a lifelike, but not that he just painted his skin white. Then moving on to his lips, I just mixed up a dark red and very carefully went over his lips, and I left a tiny bit of white showing right in the middle to show where his teeth would be shining through with his nice pearly white smile. Then I mixed up a slightly brighter red and went over just the middle of the lips and some of the areas which looked like they would catch just a little bit more light. Now moving on to the main part of his purple suit. For this again, I want to start nice and dark, mixing black in with some purple to get a really nice and dark base coat so I could work up from it. For the patch on his knee, I base coated with a similar paint color, but I mixed in a little bit more red so it would have a slightly different tone to it. Now moving on to the highlights. At this point, I'm not adding any white to brighten it up. I'm just adding more and more purple and working up through my purple tones. And I'm going over everywhere that wouldn't be in the deepest shadows with this pass. I really had a lot of fun with this part of the model, just finding all of the raised surfaces that were just this finely sculpted cloth detail across the entire model, and catching all of the edges and bringing them up and getting some nice contrast. I also wanted to make sure I was getting the hands and just really carefully bringing up some highlights on the fingers. I can also say I'm really thankful that this model's fingers are on his body because these would be so delicate if they were not. Also wanting to make sure I catch all the insides of the elbows and all of those areas that are harder to reach with the highlight layers. Then moving on and highlighting up the knee. Again, for this one, I was going with more of a reddish purple color and just working up in the same way, finding all of the raised surfaces, all of the creases, and just all of the sharp edges around the outside, and adding increasing amounts of brighter purples and reds to the mix, as well as a little bit of white towards the end just to bring it up to a final highlight. At this stage, I was doing all of the highlights on the knee pad, just on the little knee patch, just to get it all finished up, and then I would come back in and do the rest of the purple. So at this point, I'm just working up through all the various different purples I have from darkest to brightest, and just going over the raised areas, all of the creases, just keeping on going over smaller areas to really bring the interest to high points and where the light would catch. I'm also catching all the sharp edges right around the edge of the undershirt, because that will really pop, going from the dark orange right in that crease up to a nice bright highlight right next to it. That'll create a lot of contrast and really bring the eye to it. And again, here just with a brighter purple mixed up, going over it again. This is really where most of the painting was, and I really enjoy actually just like highlighting up through various shades. I find that far more enjoyable than things like base coats and stuff, because it goes so much quicker and makes such an impact, and you just get to keep working up and bringing as much contrast as you can. And now here I am with my brightest purple. For this I mixed up purple, white, as well as some retarder to slow the drying time. And I'm going over just the sharpest edges. This paint is nice and thin, so that way it wouldn't make full coverage, but it would really bring some nice bright spots. And I also drew all of the pinstripes with this. I did that all off camera though, to try to do it as neatly as I could, but because of the slight translucency of this paint, it helped hide a lot of errors. Best advice for the pinstripes was just, I tried to draw the lines straight and let the actual contours of the model make them look like that it would go curvy back and forth as the creases happened. So I didn't follow trying to follow the actual shape of the suit, and I think it worked really well. Now I'm just moving on to the little flower on a shirt, and I'm doing this from just like a gray up to a white without very many steps in between. I'm also painted the very middle of it with some yellow paint just to make it look like the little daisy it does on the artwork, on the cover art. Then I'm moving on with those same whites, and I'm covering the little bit of the white flat panel on the top of his shoe that's poking out from under his pants. And I'm highlighting that up with a white in much the same way I did for the flower, where I just with some not fully opaque layers and building it up a little bit. Also at this stage, I cleaned up the little chain he has hanging from his pocket just in black so I can come back with some non-metallic metal later on it. Here I'm just cleaning up the edges of his shoes with black so that way I have something to work up from a nice clean with no other colors on it. For his shoes, I decided to highlight them up by adding blue to my black base coat, and for this I just found the little leather creases that were on it, the edges, the sharp points and all of that, and kept going over it with increasing amounts of blue to bring up the highlight as well as a little bit of white to desaturate it, and just smaller and smaller areas to bring it up to a nice highlight. And then here, completely out of focus, I painted in his bow tie with a dark green as well as his hair. And then I went over it all with a dark green wash because I thought it wasn't quite deep enough in the recesses. For the metal chain he has coming out of his pocket, I wanted to make it interesting, so I went with a little bit of greenish metallic metal just by mixing a tiny bit of green to white with a little bit of black from my first coat and finding the little edges. And then I went over it again with almost pure white with a tiny bit of green mixed into it for the sharpest punchy bits of the non-metallic metal. Non-metallic metal on small areas I really like because it's super easy and creates a really nice effect. Then here, while I was waiting for the green wash on his hair to dry, I went over the base with a dark brown base coat. Then I took a lighter green and I went ahead over the raised bits on his bow tie as well as doing an overbrush on his hair to catch all of the detail sculpted in there and bring it up to a nice highlight. Then here I'm doing a dry brush across the base with a light cork brown. Then I base coated all of the rocks in with a gray, with a nice neutral gray I mixed up. Then for washes on the base, I just mixed up a dot of black and brown, put it on opposite sides of the base, and wet blended it across the entire thing. This creates a little bit of tonal variation without being too obvious. Then for a final step, I painted the entire base rim of the model black. I then hit him with a layer of dull coat, and then he was done. I really enjoyed painting this model. I think he's the best model I've painted yet, and I'm really happy with how he turned out. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.